Commander Veltar stood before the massive viewing screen of the Nexus Prime, as it showed a small blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. His 6 eyes focused on the world below while his scaled hands worked the control panel with practiced ease. The planet looked peaceful from this distance, but Veltar knew that looks could be deceiving. Still, this world seemed different from the others they had studied. Over the past 1,000 years, the Zephyrian Collective had sent his ship here to study the inhabitants of this world called Earth. The beings living there called themselves humans, and from what the initial scans showed, they appeared to be remarkably weak creatures. Veltar had seen the preliminary data, and it puzzled him greatly. These humans had soft skin with no natural armor or protective shells. They possessed no claws or fangs for fighting. Their bones broke easily under pressure, and their lifespans were incredibly short compared to most intelligent species in the galaxy. Dr. Yilara entered the observation deck carrying a datapad filled with information about the creatures below. She was the chief scientist assigned to this mission, and her excitement about studying a new species was clear in her voice when she spoke. The humans fascinated her because they seemed to survive despite having so many physical disadvantages. Other species in the galaxy had evolved thick hides or powerful muscles or deadly natural weapons, but humans had none of these things. The research vessel had been orbiting Earth for 3 months now while staying hidden behind advanced cloaking technology. Small observation drones flew through the atmosphere, gathering data about human behavior and military capabilities. The drones were invisible to human detection systems and could record everything from conversations to combat training exercises. What they discovered confused the Zephyrian researchers more each day. Jake Morrison woke up before dawn at Camp Pendleton, just like he had every day for the past 2 years. The 28-year-old Marine had no idea that alien eyes watched his every movement as he went through his morning routine. He dressed quickly in his combat uniform and headed to the training grounds where his unit would spend the day practicing military exercises. Jake had joined the Marines because he wanted to serve his country and protect the people he cared about most, the observation drones recorded everything as Jake and his fellow Marines ran obstacle courses and practiced combat maneuvers. The aliens watching from space noted how quickly the humans tired during physical activities. They saw how the Marines sweated heavily in the heat and needed frequent water breaks to avoid collapsing. The Zephyrians made careful notes about human physical limitations and added this information to their growing database. Dr. Amanda Clark sat in her office at the Pentagon staring at computer screens filled with strange electromagnetic readings. She worked as a behavioral psychologist for the military, and her job involved studying how soldiers performed under stress. Lately, she had noticed unusual energy signatures appearing around military bases across the country. The readings did not match any known human technology, and that worried her greatly. Ryan Murphy worked at the computer terminal next to Amanda, and his job involved analyzing electronic surveillance data. The young specialist had excellent skills with technology and could spot patterns that others might miss. He noticed that the strange electromagnetic signatures appeared most often during military training exercises. Ryan showed his findings to Amanda, and she agreed that something unusual was happening. Lisa Garcia joined their research team because of her skills with languages and communication. She had studied dozens of human languages and could often decode messages that seemed impossible to understand. When Lisa examined the electromagnetic data, she found patterns that reminded her of some kind of communication system. The signals appeared too organized to be natural phenomena, but they did not match any human transmission methods. The Zephyrians continued gathering data about human military capabilities and found themselves increasingly confused by what they observed. Human weapons seemed primitive compared to collective technology. Their vehicles moved slowly and broke down frequently. Their communication systems could be easily disrupted by simple electromagnetic interference. Yet something about the humans troubled the alien researchers, even though they could not identify exactly what it was. Commander Veltar reviewed the daily reports from his science teams and felt confident that Earth would pose no threat to the collective. The humans appeared to be exactly what the preliminary scans had suggested. They were weak creatures with limited technology and short lifespans. Their military forces used outdated equipment and relied on tactics that had not changed much in decades. Everything pointed to an easy conquest once the collective decided to claim this world. The research drones observed human soldiers during combat training and recorded their reactions to simulated battle conditions. The aliens noted how quickly humans became exhausted during prolonged fighting. They saw how human commanders struggled to coordinate large military operations. The drones also recorded conversations between soldiers and heard them complaining about equipment failures and supply shortages. Dr. Yillera compiled all the observational data into a comprehensive report for the collective leadership. She classified humans as physically inferior to most known intelligent species. Their technology lagged behind galactic standards by several thousand years. Their military organization seemed chaotic and inefficient. Based on all available evidence, she recommended classifying Earth as a Category 5 minimal threat civilization. The report traveled across space to the collective homeworlds where military planners would decide Earth's fate. The humans living below had no idea that their entire future hung in the balance, while alien scientists debated their worthiness. Jake Morrison continued his training exercises while Amanda Clark investigated strange energy readings, and neither of them suspected that every move they made was being carefully recorded and analyzed. Commander Veltar felt satisfied with his team's work as he prepared the final transmission to collective command. Earth appeared to be another weak world filled with creatures who would surrender quickly once they understood the futility of resistance. The humans might complain and protest, but they lacked the strength to oppose the collective's will. Soon this blue planet would join them. Thousands of other worlds under collective rule, and its inhabitants would learn to accept their place in the galactic order. The Nexus Prime continued its silent orbit around Earth while its crew made preparations for the next phase of their mission. 6 months passed before the Zephyrian Collective decided that Earth was ready for first contact. Commander Veltar received new orders from the homeworld that made him smile with anticipation. The time for secret observation had ended, and now came the moment when humanity would learn about their new place in the galaxy. The Nexus Prime uncloaked itself above major population centers around the world, as massive ships appeared in the skies over New York and London and Beijing and Moscow. Ambassador Kethron stood in the main communication chamber of the flagship as he prepared to deliver humanity's ultimatum. He had conducted first contact protocols with dozens of species over the centuries, and the process always followed the same pattern. The new species would see the overwhelming power of the collective fleet and quickly realize that resistance was impossible. Most civilizations surrendered within hours of first contact, and those few who refused to submit learned painful lessons about the consequences of defiance. Captain Ben Parker was eating breakfast with his family when emergency alerts began blaring from every communication device in his house. The commander of the USS Columbia grabbed the remote control and switched to the news channels where reporters were struggling to describe what they were seeing. Massive alien vessels hung motionless in the sky above every major city on Earth, while smaller craft moved between them in perfect formation. Ben kissed his wife goodbye and rushed to his command post, knowing that everything had changed forever. The alien broadcast began at exactly noon, Greenwich Mean Time, and every television and radio and computer screen on Earth displayed the same image. Ambassador Kethron appeared as a tall figure covered in scales with multiple eyes and a voice that spoke perfect English despite his clearly inhuman appearance. His message was simple and direct and left no room for misunderstanding. About humanity's options. Greetings. To the inhabitants of the world you call Earth, we represent the Zephyrian Collective, which governs 12 species across this region of the galaxy. We have studied your civilization and determined that you possess certain qualities that make you suitable for inclusion in our domain. You have 30 of your days to consider our generous offer of protection and guidance. Your leaders may choose to join the collective peacefully and enjoy the benefits of our advanced technology and wisdom. Should you refuse this opportunity, we will be forced to take corrective action to ensure galactic stability. Colonel Amy Rodriguez watched the broadcast from her office in the Pentagon while taking notes about every detail she observed. The 38-year-old officer had spent her career preparing for various threat scenarios, but alien invasion had never seemed like a realistic possibility. Now she found herself coordinating with military leaders around the world as they tried to understand exactly what kind of enemy they faced. The alien ship showed no obvious weapons, but their mere presence demonstrated technological capabilities far beyond anything humanity possessed. Secretary of State Helen Barnes found herself thrust into the most important diplomatic challenge in human history. She had negotiated treaties between nations and helped resolve international conflicts, but dealing with an alien species required entirely different skills. Helen called emergency meetings with world leaders and tried to determine if diplomacy could prevent the disaster that seemed to be approaching. The aliens had given humanity 30 days to decide, but she suspected that the outcome was already predetermined. The Zephyrians demonstrated their technological superiority in ways designed to discourage human resistance. Military satellites simply stopped working as alien technology disabled them without causing any visible damage. Entire cities lost electrical power for hours while the alien ships remained completely unaffected by any human attempts to interfere with their operations. The message was clear that humanity's technology was primitive compared to collective capabilities. Staff Sergeant Carlos Vega refused to believe that surrender was the only option available to humanity. The former Special Forces soldier had seen too many impossible situations where determination and creativity had led to victory against overwhelming odds. Carlos began organizing resistance cells in remote mountain areas where he hoped to establish bases that could continue fighting even after the government surrendered. He contacted old military friends who shared his belief that humans should never give up without a fight. Tony Chen had been working as a demolitions expert for a mining company when the aliens arrived, but his real skills came from years of military service in explosive ordnance disposal. Carlos recruited him because destroying alien technology might be the only way humans could level the playing field. Kate Wilson joined their group because her experience with military communications could help coordinate resistance activities across different regions. Sam Brown completed their initial team with medical training that would be essential for treating wounded fighters. The aliens shared video recordings of their previous conquest to demonstrate what happened to species who refused to join the collective peacefully. Worlds that had resisted were subjected to surgical strikes against military targets until their governments agreed to surrender. The recordings showed devastated cities and broken armies, while alien forces occupied important strategic locations. Ambassador Kethron explained that these civilizations now enjoyed peace and prosperity under collective rule. Dr. Amanda Clark continued monitoring electromagnetic anomalies around military installations while trying to understand alien surveillance methods. She worked with Ryan Murphy and Lisa Garcia to analyze the communication patterns they had detected during the secret observation period. The team discovered that the aliens had been watching human activities for months before revealing themselves. This knowledge gave Amanda hope that humans might understand enough about alien technology to develop effective countermeasures. World leaders held emergency sessions at the United Nations, while protesters filled the streets of major cities demanding either immediate surrender or determined resistance. Some humans believed that joining the collective offered the only path to survival, while others insisted that freedom was worth fighting for regardless of the odds. The debates grew more heated as the 30-day deadline approached and no clear consensus emerged about humanity's response. Commander Veltar observed human reactions to first contact with growing confidence about the mission's eventual success. The humans were behaving exactly as predicted, with their leaders engaging in lengthy debates, while their military forces prepared defenses that would prove useless against collective technology. Some humans spoke bravely about resistance, but Veltar had heard similar words from dozens of other species before they accepted the inevitable reality of submission. The collective fleet maintained position above Earth while additional ships arrived from other star systems to reinforce the occupation force. The aliens made no hostile moves, but their presence served as a constant reminder that humanity's fate hung in the balance. Ambassador Kethron began preliminary negotiations with certain human leaders who seemed willing to consider surrender terms, but he made it clear that the offer would not remain available indefinitely. As the deadline approached, tension filled the air around the world while humans prepared for whatever decision their leaders would make. The 30-day deadline expired at exactly midnight, Greenwich Mean Time, and humanity's answer came not through diplomatic channels but through the actions of ordinary people who refused to surrender their freedom. President Harrison addressed the world from an undisclosed location, and her words were simple, but carried the weight of an entire species behind them. "We reject your ultimatum, and we will resist your occupation with every means at our disposal." Earth belongs to humanity, and we will not bow to alien masters regardless of the consequences. Ambassador. Kethron felt genuine surprise when he received humanity's official response, because most species chose surrender over destruction. The humans seemed to understand that their technology was inferior, and their military forces were outmatched, but they chose defiance anyway. Kethron had expected this outcome based on human behavior patterns, but he had hoped that their leaders would show more wisdom. Now the collective would be forced to demonstrate why resistance was futile. The first surgical strikes began exactly 1 hour after the deadline passed as alien ships targeted military installations around the world. Peterson Air Force Base became the focal point of humanity's desperate defense when Major Kevin Turner led his squadron of outdated fighter jets against technologically superior opponents. The human pilots knew they were flying to their deaths, but they launched anyway because someone had to make the first stand. Major Turner's F-16 screamed through the morning sky as he locked onto the nearest alien craft and fired every missile he carried. The weapons struck their target but seemed to have no effect on the enemy ship, which continued moving as if nothing had happened. Turner watched in amazement as his squadron mates pressed their attacks despite the obvious futility of their weapons. One by one, the human fighters were destroyed by precise energy beams that cut through their armor like paper. When his aircraft finally took a direct hit, Turner ejected and watched. His plane spiraled toward the ground in flames. He landed hard in a field outside the base and immediately began moving toward the fighting with only his sidearm and determination to guide him. The Major had never expected to survive the first engagement, but he was alive, and that meant he could still fight. Turner reached the base perimeter, where other survivors were gathering to continue the battle on foot. Colonel Rachel Davis had been hiking in the Rocky Mountains when the alien ultimatum expired, and she watched the first attacks from a ridge overlooking Colorado Springs. The career soldier immediately understood that conventional military tactics would be useless against the alien technology, but humans had other options available. Davis began moving through the mountains toward predetermined rally points where resistance fighters had been stockpiling supplies and equipment for exactly this scenario. The aliens quickly discovered that defeating human military forces was easier than controlling human territory. Every time they destroyed a base or eliminated a unit, new fighters appeared to take their place. The humans seemed to have an endless supply of people willing to die for their cause, and this puzzled the Zephyrian commanders, who had never encountered such behavior before. Most rational species understood when they were beaten and accepted defeat. Gracefully, Dr. Nathan Webb was working in his laboratory when the attacks began, and he immediately started collecting samples of alien technology from crashed vehicles and damaged equipment. The physicist had been preparing for this possibility since the first alien ships appeared, and his team was ready to begin reverse engineering whatever they could salvage. Nathan worked with engineer Maya Johnson and weapons specialist Luke Thompson to analyze alien materials and look for weaknesses they could exploit. Staff Sergeant Carlos Vega had spent the 30-day grace period establishing hidden bases throughout the Appalachian Mountains, and when the shooting started, his resistance cells were ready to begin operations. The former Special Forces soldier had trained his people in guerrilla warfare tactics that would allow small groups to harass alien forces without engaging in direct confrontation. Carlos knew that humans could not win through conventional battles, but they might succeed through persistence and cunning. The Zephyrians expected human resistance to collapse within days of the initial strikes, but instead they found themselves facing an enemy that became more dangerous as the situation grew more desperate. Human fighters used terrain and weather and darkness to their advantage, while employing tactics that seemed to ignore basic military logic. The aliens had sophisticated computer systems that could predict enemy behavior, but humans consistently did things that made no strategic sense. Tony Chen and his demolition team struck their first target 3 days after the fighting began, when they destroyed an alien communication relay station using improvised explosives. The attack accomplished nothing tactically significant, but it proved that alien technology was not invulnerable to human ingenuity. News of the successful sabotage spread through resistance networks and inspired other groups to attempt similar operations against enemy installations. Commander Veltar found himself requesting reinforcements from the collective homeworld as human resistance proved far more stubborn than anticipated. The aliens had lost more ships and equipment in 3 months of fighting than they had during their previous century of conquest operations. Veltar could not understand how creatures he had classified as weak and fragile continued fighting after sustaining losses that would destroy any rational military force. Major Kevin Turner led a small group of survivors through the ruins of Peterson Air Force Base as they searched for useful equipment and supplies. The base had been completely destroyed, but the humans refused to abandon it to alien control. Turner's people had established a network of tunnels and hidden positions throughout the area, and they emerged each night to harass enemy patrols and gather intelligence about alien operations. The Resistance fighters learned to use human technology in ways that confused alien analysts who had studied Earth's military capabilities. Kate Wilson discovered that standard radio equipment could interfere with certain alien systems if used in specific frequency combinations. Sam Brown developed medical techniques for treating injuries caused by alien energy weapons. Each small victory gave the humans more confidence and better understanding of their enemies' capabilities. Colonel Rachel Davis coordinated guerrilla operations across multiple states, while staying constantly on the move to avoid alien detection systems. Her forces struck supply convoys and isolated outposts before disappearing back into wilderness areas where alien technology had difficulty tracking them. Davis knew that the Resistance could not win through conventional victory, but they could make occupation so costly that the aliens might eventually decide Earth was not worth the trouble. Dr. Nathan Webb's research team achieved their first breakthrough when they successfully modified an alien power cell to operate human equipment. The discovery meant that Resistance fighters could use captured alien technology to improve their own capabilities. Maya Johnson developed new weapons that combined human creativity with alien energy systems, while Luke Thompson created defensive systems that could protect Resistance bases from enemy detection. The Zephyrian collective leadership began questioning their initial assessment of human capabilities as reports arrived from Earth describing unexpected developments. The humans were not surrendering despite overwhelming technological disadvantage, and they seemed to be learning from each encounter with collective forces. Some species had continued fighting for months before accepting defeat, but humanity appeared to be getting stronger rather than weaker as the conflict progressed. Ambassador Kethron requested permission to begin more aggressive tactics against human population centers, but the Collective Council hesitated to authorize such measures. The humans had not committed any acts that justified complete extermination, and their resistance methods were not violating accepted rules of warfare. The situation on Earth was becoming complicated in ways that the Collective had never experienced. During previous conquest operations, the war continued, with no clear end in sight as both sides adapted to new realities that neither had anticipated. When the conflict began, 2 years of constant warfare had transformed humanity from a divided world of competing nations into a unified species focused on a single goal of survival. The humans had evolved beyond traditional military doctrine and were employing tactics that defied every strategic principle known to galactic civilization. General Patricia Hayes commanded the newly formed Terran Defense Coalition from deep underground bunkers carved into the Appalachian Mountains, where human engineers had built an entire hidden city powered by captured alien technology. The Resistance had grown from scattered groups of survivors into a coordinated military force that operated across multiple continents while maintaining constant communication through networks that the aliens could not detect or disrupt. Patricia worked 18-hour days coordinating operations with cell leaders like Commander Alex Stone, who had established control over large portions of what used to be called Europe, and Colonel Maria Santos, who commanded resistance forces throughout South America. The humans had learned to think globally while acting locally in ways that confused alien military analysts. Engineer Drew Miller had become one of the most important people in the Resistance because his teams were successfully reverse engineering alien technology and creating hybrid weapons that combined human creativity with superior galactic science. The breakthrough had come when they discovered that alien systems were designed for logical minds that followed predictable patterns, but human irrationality could make the technology behave in unexpected ways. Drew's people were building weapons that should not work according to alien physics, but functioned perfectly when operated by humans who refused to accept limitations. The modification of Zephyrian shield generators represented humanity's greatest technological achievement since the war began, because it allowed the construction of protected underground cities that could house thousands of people. The aliens had designed these devices to protect individual soldiers or small vehicles, but human engineers scaled them up to cover entire installations. The shield technology required enormous amounts of power, but the humans had solved this problem by linking multiple alien power sources together in configurations that violated every safety protocol in the collective technical manual. Captain Jennifer Walsh led the first successful boarding action against a Zephyrian capital ship when her team of 20 fighters somehow managed to infiltrate the massive vessel during a routine supply operation. The humans moved through corridors designed for creatures twice their size, while fighting guards who possessed superior strength and advanced weapons. Walsh's people succeeded through pure determination and willingness to accept casualties that would be unthinkable to any rational military force. The psychological impact of the boarding action rippled throughout the Zephyrian fleet as word spread that their most secure vessels were no longer safe from human attack. The aliens had never experienced warfare where the enemy actively sought out the most dangerous assignments and volunteered for missions that offered almost no chance of survival. Jennifer Walsh and her team had demonstrated that humans would literally climb aboard enemy ships to continue fighting, and this realization troubled alien commanders who had spent centuries studying military theory. Commander Scott Baker was preparing his forces for an even more ambitious mission as he planned the assault on Luna Station, which represented humanity's first major space installation. The humans had lost the orbital facility during the early days of the war, but intelligence reports suggested that it was only lightly defended because the aliens considered it strategically unimportant. Baker knew that retaking Luna Station would give humanity a foothold in space and access to manufacturing facilities that could produce more advanced weapons and equipment. The Zephyrian collective was experiencing internal discord for the first time in over a millennium, as different factions debated how to handle the situation on Earth. Fleet Admiral Mordun argued that complete orbital bombardment was the only solution to the human problem because conventional military operations had proven ineffective against an enemy that refused to behave rationally. Science Director Yalara insisted that the collective needed to understand how humans continued functioning under stress levels that should have broken any known species. Dr. Yalara had been studying captured human prisoners, and her research was producing results that challenged everything the collective thought they knew about intelligent life. The humans displayed remarkable psychological resilience and seemed to grow stronger when facing impossible odds, rather than weaker as logic would dictate. She had observed human fighters who continued operating combat equipment while suffering from injuries that should have rendered them unconscious, but they somehow maintained focus on their missions despite massive trauma. The resistance networks had evolved into something resembling a new form of government, as local commanders took responsibility for civilian populations in their areas while maintaining military discipline among their fighters. Colonel Rachel Davis had established training camps throughout the Rocky Mountains, where new recruits learned guerrilla warfare techniques from veterans who had survived multiple engagements with alien forces. The humans were developing institutional knowledge about fighting technologically superior enemies and passing these lessons to each new generation of fighters. Major Kevin Turner had been promoted to coordinate air operations for the entire North American resistance, and he was working with captured alien aircraft that his pilots had learned to fly through trial and error. The human pilots could not understand the alien control systems, but they had developed intuitive methods for operating the vehicles that produced acceptable results. Turner's squadron was conducting raids against alien installations using their enemy's own technology while employing tactics that no alien pilot would ever attempt. The weapons development teams led by Luke Thompson had achieved remarkable success in creating ammunition that could penetrate alien armor by studying the molecular structure of Zephyrian defensive materials. The humans discovered that certain combinations of Earth metals could disrupt the energy fields that protected alien soldiers and equipment. This breakthrough allowed resistance fighters to use modified conventional weapons against enemies they previously could not harm with any available technology. Maya Johnson was leading a project to construct human versions of alien spacecraft, using salvaged components and Earth manufacturing techniques. The hybrid vehicles would never match collective technology for speed or firepower, but they could be built in large numbers, using materials that were readily available on Earth. Johnson's team was essentially creating a human space navy from scratch while fighting a war that showed no signs of ending. Communication networks had become the backbone of human resistance as Kate Wilson and her teams developed methods for maintaining contact between widely separated units without using technology that aliens could detect. The humans were using everything from trained birds to buried cables to light signals reflected off clouds for sending messages across vast distances. The communication systems were primitive by galactic standards, but they worked reliably and could not be disrupted by alien jamming equipment. Sam Brown had established medical facilities throughout the resistance network where wounded fighters received treatment using both human surgical techniques and alien medical technology. The combination produced remarkable results as human doctors learned to use alien healing devices, while alien medical equipment was modified to work with human physiology. Brown's medics were saving lives that would have been lost using conventional Earth medicine and returning fighters to active duty faster than alien analysts thought possible. The Terran Defense Coalition was planning operations that would have been impossible for any normal military organization as human commanders prepared to launch simultaneous attacks against alien positions on 6 different continents. General Patricia Hayes was coordinating the largest military operation in human history, while working with resources that should not have been sufficient for such an ambitious undertaking. The humans were attempting something that violated every principle of military logistics, but they believed it could succeed through determination and willingness to accept enormous risks. Commander Veltar found himself facing a situation that he had never encountered during decades of military service as his forces struggled to maintain control over a planet whose inhabitants seemed incapable of accepting defeat. The humans had lost every major battle of the war, but they continued fighting as if victory was still possible. Veltar was requesting additional reinforcements from the homeworld, while trying to explain how creatures he had classified as weak and primitive were somehow managing to threaten collective operations throughout the sector. The war was entering a new phase as both sides prepared for confrontations that would determine whether humanity would survive as a free species or join the thousands of other worlds under collective rule. The Battle of Luna Station began exactly 3 years after first contact, when Commander Scott Baker led 800 human fighters in the most desperate assault of the entire war. The orbital facility represented humanity's last chance to establish a meaningful presence in space, and everyone understood that failure would mean Earth would remain trapped under alien blockade forever. Baker's force consisted of volunteers who knew they were flying into what military analysts called a suicide mission. But they launched anyway because someone had to try. The assault force used captured alien transport ships that had been modified by human engineers to carry more fighters than the original design specifications allowed. The vehicles were overloaded and barely functional, but they could reach Luna Station before suffering complete mechanical failure. Scott Baker sat in the lead transport watching his people prepare for battle, while knowing that most of them would never see Earth again. The humans had painted their faces with symbols from every nation and culture on the planet, because they were fighting for all humanity. The Zephyrian defenders of Luna Station were caught completely off guard when the human transports appeared from multiple directions simultaneously, while broadcasting surrender messages on all communication frequencies. The aliens initially believed they were witnessing a mass capitulation, as hundreds of human voices announced their intention to give up the fight and accept collective authority. The deception lasted just long enough for the transport ships to reach docking range before the humans revealed their true intentions. Baker's fighters poured out of their transports and began moving through Luna Station with determination that defied every tactical manual in the galaxy. The humans accepted casualty rates that would have caused any rational military force to retreat immediately, but they continued advancing through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. The station's artificial gravity worked against the attackers because they were lighter than the alien defenders, but the humans adapted by using their smaller size and greater agility to move through spaces their enemies could not access. Decom. Fighting lasted for 18 hours as humans and aliens battled for control of every section of the massive facility. The defenders had superior weapons and better armor, But the attackers possessed something that no military computer could calculate or predict. Jennifer Walsh led her boarding specialists through the station's central core, while Tony Chen's demolition teams targeted critical systems throughout the structure. The humans were willing to destroy Luna Station rather than allow it to remain in alien hands. The turning point came when human fighters discovered that they could use the station's life support systems against the alien defenders by introducing Earth atmosphere into sections designed for different environmental conditions. The Zephyrians could not breathe human air without protective equipment, and this gave the attackers a crucial advantage in close-quarters combat. Maya Johnson's engineering teams quickly modified the atmospheric controls to flood entire decks with oxygen-rich air that weakened their enemies. Commander Scott Baker found himself fighting in the station's command center, alongside the handful of survivors from his original force, as they struggled to maintain control of the facility's most important systems. The humans had suffered 90% casualties during the assault, but the remaining fighters continued operating critical equipment, even as they lay dying from their wounds. Baker watched his people give their lives to ensure that Luna Station would remain in human hands, regardless of what happened next. The Zephyrians finally understood what made humanity unique, as they watched human soldiers continue fighting while suffering from injuries that should have rendered them unconscious. The aliens had studied dozens of intelligent species over the centuries, but they had never encountered beings who became more dangerous when they were losing, rather than less dangerous. The humans were not fighting to preserve their strength, but to transcend their limitations, and this realization sent shockwaves throughout the collective fleet. Admiral Christina Ford assumed command of humanity's expanding space forces after the successful capture of Luna Station, and she immediately began planning offensive operations against Zephyrian supply lines across multiple star systems. The humans were using salvaged alien technology, combined with manufacturing capabilities from the orbital facility, to produce hybrid spacecraft that could operate in deep space. Ford's fleet would never match collective vessels for individual capability, but they could be built quickly and operated by crews willing to accept impossible missions. The Luna Station victory proved to be the catalyst that transformed the entire character of the war as human forces began striking targets throughout the local star cluster, while employing strategies that no other species had ever conceived. The attacks made no sense from a traditional military perspective, because they often resulted in the complete destruction of human units. But they achieved psychological effects that were far more valuable than any tactical advantage. The aliens were learning to fear an enemy that they had initially dismissed as weak and primitive. Dr. Amanda Clark was working alongside captured Zephyrian scientists in research facilities deep beneath the surface of Earth, where humans and aliens were beginning to understand each other for the first time since the war began. The joint research teams were studying the psychological differences between species, and their work was producing insights that could benefit both civilizations. Amanda had discovered that humans were the only known species that became stronger when broken, rather than weaker, and this trait made them uniquely suited for surviving impossible circumstances. The final confrontation occurred when human forces launched a coordinated assault against the Nexus Prime itself, in an operation that required every remaining spacecraft in Admiral Ford's fleet. The attack was militarily insane because it pitted humanity's entire space navy against the most heavily defended vessel in the Zephyrian Armada, but the humans believed they could succeed through determination and willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. Lieutenant Jake Morrison led the boarding party that would capture Commander Veltar and seize the ship's database containing all research about human capabilities. The assault on Nexus Prime became the most savage battle of the entire war, as human fighters used every lesson they had learned about alien technology, while their enemies employed weapons that had never been deployed against any previous opponent. The humans suffered terrible losses, but they continued advancing through the massive ship, while Jake Morrison's team fought their way toward the command deck. The aliens discovered that their most secure vessel was not safe from creatures who considered death an acceptable price for achieving their objectives. Commander Veltar was captured alive when Jake Morrison's team finally reached the Nexus Prime Command Center after fighting through the ship's entire defensive force. The human lieutenant had survived 4 years of constant warfare, and he represented everything that the aliens had failed to understand about his species. Morrison was wounded and exhausted and should have collapsed from blood loss, but he continued functioning because his mission was not complete. The sight of this broken human still fighting filled Veltar with something resembling respect. The ship's database contained every report and analysis that the Zephyrians had compiled about human behavior during their initial observation period and throughout the war itself. The research files revealed how completely the collective had misunderstood humanity from the very beginning when they classified Earth as a minimal threat civilization. Dr. Yelera's final report acknowledged that humans possessed no physical weaknesses because their apparent fragility was actually the source of their greatest strength. The war ended not with human victory over the Zephyrian collective, but with mutual recognition that both species had something valuable to offer galactic civilization. The humans had demonstrated that determination and creativity could overcome any technological disadvantage, while the aliens possessed knowledge and resources that could benefit all intelligent life. The peace negotiations were conducted by beings who had learned to respect each other through 4 years of brutal conflict. Commander Veltar wrote his final report about the human species while sitting in a cell aboard Luna Station, where he was being held as a prisoner of war. His analysis concluded that the collective had sent ships to study human weakness but had instead discovered a species with no weaknesses that could not be overcome through will and determination. The humans were not strong because they never fell, but because they rose every time they were knocked down, and this quality made them unique in a galaxy filled with civilizations that had forgotten how to fight for their freedom. The integration of humanity into galactic society occurred gradually as other species learned that humans could be called upon when facing impossible odds because they specialized in achieving victory through defeat. The Terran Defense Coalition became the organization that other civilizations contacted when they needed someone willing to attempt missions that rational beings would consider suicidal. The galaxy had discovered that sometimes the greatest strength came from those who had been forced to find ways to be strong.